from where Jacob Blake was shot in the back going into his car. No one's being charged. He shot 7 times, close range. He said he was going for a knife. Officer did what he was trained to do. I bet you the city will settle with him, with his private lawyer, Ben Crump, and they will get millions, but they won't take it to court because they're not going to press charges. That's going to be how things are going to be dealt with now. Get Benjamin Crump to represent your family. If you're alive, he will represent you. If you're passed away, he will represent your family. They will settle with the city. The city will give you some money, and then they won't press charges against the cops. If Benjamin Crump's not your lawyer, you're fucked. So what? So what? So what? So what? So blood clot what? Meaning they're going to believe the police officer.
cop, now he is exposed to cross-examination. Remember, if he's going to take the stand, the defense attorneys are going to cross-examine him. And the problem is there's a 2010 case, Cook County Sheriff's Department case, which will be subject to withering cross-examination on Jacob Blake having made
All right, thanks for letting me know there's no sound. Taras. This equipment tricked me, man. Anyway, this guy's explaining that Jacob Blake knew he had a warrant. So what?
Well, isn't there a prior occasion in 2010 where you also resisted officers when they tried to command?
What's that got to do with
it?
That doesn't justify you shooting him.
You also reached into your waistband with your left hand and pulled out a knife. By the way, that's what the
shot 7 times for pulling out a knife.
Well.
Close range.
Left hand got the knife out of the waistband. And isn't it true that in that case in 2010, you produced a knife where the blade was open? Remember, in our case, a knife is produced with the blade open. And isn't it true that officers jumped back, they yelled knife, and they drew weapons, and even after those officers in 2010 drew those weapons, you slashed at an officer's chest.
Uh-oh. So does past history justify you getting shot?
Isn't it true, even after officers pointed weapons at you, you proceeded towards them, saying, come on and shoot me, still swirling that knife around in a threatening manner? And isn't it finally true that you refused repeated commands to drop the knife and were tased multiple times before they took you into custody?
This is 2010.
A lot of similarities to our case. Again, it in no way would be able to demonstrate to you folks that he acted in conformity. This is 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
But he would be subject to absolutely devastating cross-examination that a jury would hear about an incident where he did display a knife, and if he denied any of those things, he would be...
Listen, it goes back to
if I was cross-examined,
Trayvon Martin style. They're saying we're not going to put ourselves in a position where we're going to take this to court and lose because they're going to talk about the man's character and what he's done in the past to police. Reasonable doubt, justified, acquitted. Then we're going to have what? Riots. So what they're going to do, Benjamin Crump is representing Jacob Blake. Jacob Blake is alive, thank God. So he's representing him. He's not representing the family because he's alive. The city will make a settlement with Ben Crump. The DA will come and say, we're not charging anyone. And they will get money from the city, civil. They won't go to court. It will settle.
So here's a witness who's present directly for almost all of what
the officers will walk free.
Made the call to police.
There'll be no riots.
Has not made herself available
because jury didn't go and decide that he was. They're not even pressing charges.
Go with the evidence that is available to me.
In this case, the victim is alive.
She also was not available to the special prosecutor on that warrant case.
That's going to be the
that case as a special prosecutor.
Cases moving forward from now on, if there are any more cases.
And so when they resolve their
if you see Ben Crump representing,
not able to find her.
That's going to be the path that will be taken.
We were very close to
time after time. It happened to
decision in this case.
Breonna Taylor. Now it's happening to Jacob Blake.
Received a tip.
And with the case of George Floyd, it was obvious that he was killed by a knee. So that guy's going to jail because he's charged with murder. But Ahmaud Arbery,
those things began
that's private citizens did that. So they'll probably go to jail. But when it comes to police, the police unions,
it's still a pending
we'll try and do this.
I'm not going to answer any other questions other than that we have no specific concern that she's unsafe. But I'm indicating to you there is an investigation going on about that. Again, I'm going to refuse to answer any additional questions.
To be accurate, Jacob Blake was police come because Jacob Blake had violated a restraining order and he was, had a history of domestic abuse. So if domestic abuse is important, which it is, for all the people that went in on major hype, then Jacob Blake was wrong.
I'm going to introduce him in a moment.
But for the police to shoot him 7 times in the back, I don't understand why these people can't shoot someone in the leg or the knee. That's what I want to know.
What would happen is
Ain't you trained? Why don't you shoot someone in the leg, in the toe, in the knee, in the elbow? The fuck?
The decision points here. And that's why this neutral, independent use of force expert was so important. And so Noble Ray was employed in this case. Again, I don't think it's ever been done that way before, but he comes with extraordinary qualifications. He has some opinions to offer, and when he's finished, I'm going to briefly conclude. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight some things. I'm going to stay pretty much close to issues related to use of force related to this particular case. I'm going to be brief because I think the DA has covered most of the points, most of the salient points with this particular case. Let me start off by saying, just like many of you, when I was contacted originally by the Attorney General's office about exploring if I could be part of this particular case, I was a bit surprised because having served as a chief of police in the state of Wisconsin for 10 years and law enforcement here for 30 years, this is something that is unique. This is something that has not been done, to my knowledge, where you would have an expert witness in this fashion. Usually, it's someone that is in the field doing it. The reason why I was asked was because in the state of Wisconsin, for those of you that are not aware, there was a law that was passed in 2014 that required that the Department of Criminal Investigations would have to do the investigation. And that was for reasons of transparency, objectivity, etc. But before then, as a chief of police in the state of Wisconsin, we had to do our own investigations. So I had the unique responsibility as a chief of police for 10 years of overseeing somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 officer-involved shootings. So I come to this with the perspective of having to deal with officer-involved shootings as an administrator, as someone who has investigated, and as a 30-year officer that has investigated use of force complaints. So that is my background, I believe, was the reason, one of the reasons why I was asked, along with, working at a national level, dealing with reform issues both on a national level, working as a deputy monitor in Cleveland. I won't go through a whole lot of the background, but I think those are the reasons why I was asked. My resume and my bio is also will be available with my report. So if someone needs to look further in terms of my background, it is available to you. Like most Americans that saw that video back in August, like most Americans, I was very troubled. I was emotionally troubled. As a person, that really bothered me. From a human standpoint, it just cut away in ways that, most of us really understand. That was very difficult to watch. As a police professional, when I looked at that, I had problems. The first thing that came to my mind as Mr. Blake is rounding the corner in front of that vehicle is, why didn't the officers just grab him? Why didn't they just grab a hold of this guy and take him down? Why did they allow for him to get to that side of the car and then shoot him in the back? That's how I felt. And those were my feelings that I had. The other feelings and emotions that came from this was this. You had a mother, and I'm a father. You had a grandmother. You had a mother that you could see on television was in a lot of pain in terms of what happened to her son. You had a father that was angry, which I understood. I understood that time and that date, the anger and the feelings. Having led a police organization for 10 years, I knew that the officers and their families were also going through anguish. Overtones of a domestic violence situation led me to believe that these things are still real in the society. So that's how I came to this. These are the emotions, these are the thoughts that I came to this. I was asked to do an independent investigation and independent review. Again, as an administrator, as someone who hasn't been involved with use of force issues. So let me hit on some points because, again, I think a lot of the points have been hit on, but I do want to emphasize some things that was there. First of all, officers in the state of Wisconsin and all over the United States are bound by Graham versus Connor. It is at the root of what they're thinking. It is at the root of how they approach a use of force situation. And Graham versus Connor, there are three things in the state of Wisconsin and all over the United States that an officer is thinking about in use of force. One is the crime. And in this particular case was unique. The seriousness of the crime was already taken care of in reality because it was a search warrant, a serious felony warrant for sexual assault, a serious felony warrant. So that part was taken care of. And what's important about that is that in most use of force incidents, an officer is calculating in their mind, do they have PC? Is this serious enough based upon Tennessee versus Garner? You have to have some level of seriousness. Okay, so that was one, the crime. It was already taken care of. The PC was already dealt with by a judge. It had been signed off on it. So that's one. Number two is the person actively resisting. Actively resisting. That means that they're just doing everything they can not to be taken into custody. And in this particular case, you've heard the DA describe this. And in this particular case, I would call it extreme actively resisting. There were 4 areas in which the encounter with the officers took place. And I will describe these 4 areas. Because what most people in America saw was the last part. They saw the part where the struggle is taking place and the officers back away, and then Mr. Blake goes around the corner. But there was something that happened before then that I want to describe. What happened before then is Officer Shishke and the other officers responded, and they knew they immediately were going to make an arrest. That's the nature of an arrest warrant. Officer Shishke approaches Mr. Blake. They have a brief dialogue. According to Officer Shishke, he believes that Blake is going to try and run. So he immediately reaches out during this very brief conversation and tries to take Blake into custody. And it is at that point that it is on. The active resisting starts to take place. Officer Shishke is not able, and the other officers are not able to take him into custody. This takes place on the back right part of the SUV, of the vehicle. And at that time, Blake has a knife. He's not displaying it, but he has a knife. He has it on him. And that part, people, again, it's not clear. He has it when this encounter first starts. During that portion where they're at the back right quarter panel of the vehicle and they're struggling with Blake, as what was described, he is tased at that time. And let me just take just one step back. From a use of force standpoint, the way officers are trained is at first, your presence is part of the use of force in what you do. You'll all go, and you've seen the protests that we've had, and if you see officers out there, the presence means something. That means that a person knows that when they see an officer, there's certain things that they should be reticent about and understand what's going on. So presence. Then 2, dialogue. They try to dialogue. But as what was mentioned and what I found in the reports is that it happened so quick. There were some comments exchanged between Blake and Officer Shishke, and it was on. So presence and dialogue, those are 2 different things. I mean, those are 2 key parts of use of force. Then the third part of this is that they were physically, with open hands, trying to take him into custody. And this went on and on and on. Okay, the other part, while they're at this back right corner panel, is that Mr. Blake is tased. The taser prongs, based upon the officers, they believe that they deployed the taser in the manner in which it should have worked. Mr. Blake takes the taser prongs out, They have
Who
little
makes
or
these
no
fucking
effect.
tasers?
At the same location, they try what is referred to as a drive stun. Now, if you talk to people
That's how
in the profession that really are experts on tasers,
Stephen
and the
Taylor was
impact of
killed
tasers,
after
this
2
is
tasers.
Unusual. Tasers work somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% success rate, depending upon the department that is collecting the
Bollocks.
data.
You send
But
people
it
to
is
Mars and
unusual
Jupiter
for
and
this
shit,
sequence
and
to
they
just
come
pull
back,
the taser prongs out.
and you can't make a taser that
Okay,
works?
And then also a drive stun. So that is at the back right corner panel. The struggle ensues around to the rear of the vehicle. Again, there are more use of force intervention options, as is referred to by the state of Wisconsin.
Shut the door on his ass when his body is between in the car. Just close the door on him, and before you press the door, what's he going to do?
Blake. And when they talk about decentralized, they took him to the ground, Officer Shishke, who is the primary officer engaged in all of the use of force that takes place here. He takes him to the ground to immobilize them, to make sure that they're trying to take control. They also, during that time, Officer Shishke delivers strikes to Jacob Blake to what is referred to as diffuse them, to confuse them. None of these things work. Witnesses can see that not only they're struggling in the rear, but they also see that both Blake and Officer Shishke at one point in time, they have each other in headlocks. Officer Shishke feels uncomfortable. He feels
So
that
where's
his gun
the
is
other
exposed.
people? Where are the other officers?
These are things that take place. Now, so you start to the back right corner panel, you go to the rear. The struggle continues to ensue. It reaches a point where Officer Moronic believes that things have gotten out of control. They're unable to, restrain him or take him into custody, that she decides at that particular time to contact dispatch to have more officers respond. And they also make the comment, 2 of the officers, Officer Shishke, Officer Moronic, make the comment that they feel that, that they don't have control, they're starting to feel tired.
If they got the footage, why don't they just release it and get it over with? All they have to do is release it. Otherwise, we're going by their word? Is that what's happening here?
Stronger than they are, so they move back to the back right corner panel. That is the part where everyone starts to see this thing again. That's what's covered in video. So you missed the other 2 parts.
So release the fucking
When
video.
they're back by that back right corner panel, that is where, let me take a step back because I'm missing an important piece. Because
This is an ex-police officer here.
When Blake is first contacted, he has the knife. The knife, it drops or it is placed. It is either dropped or placed. It's kind of unsure when you listen to the statements, but it falls down and it is by the vehicle.
What?
Underneath the vehicle. And then Blake and the officers are struggling. They go back around. I believe, based upon the statements that I've read, that he does not have a knife at that time. And he's at the rear of the vehicle. That's why I'm using the locations. So when they struggle back around to the back right corner panel, it is at that time, I believe, that Mr. Blake recovers the knife and is armed again. He picks the knife back up. Those are his words.
Why didn't the knife get kicked away by? Oh my God!
At that particular time. So back at the right, that corner panel, they're struggling.
So
with
once
him.
again,
He
it's
is
the
tased
incompetence
again.
of the police officers just not knowing the simplest
prongs
thing
out again.
that ends up someone getting shot.
Now, during this struggle, the officers, 2 of the officers believe that they have seen a knife and they describe it in their reports. The primary officer involved in this, Officer Shishke, has not seen the knife, but he believes that Blake is going for a weapon, and he describes that in his report. So what you have is that you have the struggle going on where you have the 2 officers believe that they have seen the knife, they describe it in 2 different ways.
No, what we have is a bunch of officers saying the same thing to make sure none of them is found guilty of anything. What the fuck?
The struggle ensues. They're on the right
Don't
side.
take people for
back on the
idiot.
right side of the vehicle. They have backed away. They have tased them. The struggle again continues. And then at one point in time, when they're back on the right side again, it is Officer Moronic who shouts, "The knife." They see the knife. They see the knife. It is at that point where the officers create distance. They step back with their firearms, and that's what you see on the video. So just again, so it's really clear, It starts from the back right corner panel, it goes to the back of the vehicle, and then it comes back around. When it comes back around, that is when Blake picks the knife.
How many officers are there in the
So
video?
there was a lot
You telling me
missing
they couldn't
out
hold
of
the
it.
guy just like they?
And once he picks the knife back up, and as he starts to move around,
Yeah.
that is actually the first time that the primary officer in this, Officer Shishki, sees the knife. That is the first time.
The fuck? He just said he was going for the knife
So
before.
we have this thing that is rapidly evolving. It's dynamic.
Who is this dude?
How rapidly evolving it was from the time that this thing starts, from the time that the officers arrive and they move around, and as District Attorney Gravely described, that as you've seen in the video, Blake
Ex-cop.
moves around the vehicle. They go around to the front driver's side.
Yeah.
And they start to pull on Blake, and then the shots are fired.
They?
From the time the officers
More than
arrive
one.
to the time those shots are fired, it is 1 minute, approximately 1 minute and 5 seconds. So all of this is taking place in 1 minute and 5 seconds.
That's not a
how
short time.
rapidly evolving the situation was.
Then the statute requires that the district attorney, the elected district attorney in that county, must determine if there's a basis to prosecute any of the involved law enforcement. And it is my decision now that I announce today before you that no Kenosha law enforcement officer in this case will be charged with any criminal offense based on the facts and the laws as I will describe them to you now. So it is our decision that no charge will be filed.
Beginning, the knife is dropped at one point in time during the struggle. Blake decides to pick the knife back up. It is armed, it is visible, they see it, they move back around. All three responding officers report seeing it. It was at the end that they all saw it and they reacted to it in a use of force manner. Now, just think about this. The two officers saw the knife. Two of the officers saw the knife at the beginning. But because, and this is what I surmise, but because Officer Shishki was so involved with the struggle that they could not back away. Because what you're trained to do is
This makes
create
no
distance and
sense.
space so that you can take evasive action and maybe take cover, maybe create dialogue. But and that's what they did in the end. They created distance and space, as you can see in that video. There are several photos taken at the scene where you see the knife that was there, that was described in the end when Blake was shot, and it's on the floorboard of the driver's seat. You also see photos at the processing center where the knife is resting there. Other ways that you know that there was a knife there. The cell phone video shows Blake in possession of the knife, which I was really surprised to see that. When I saw that, that enhanced video. On the cell phone video, officers are giving verbal commands. This was interesting to me. The officers are giving verbal commands to drop the knife, but again, none of the witnesses saw that. Even the witness that took the video, the cell phone video, did not see that. But you can actually hear the officer saying, "Drop the knife." A number of witnesses.
But the knife, he did drop. The knife wasn't in his possession. Remember, they saw the knife.
Shouting that.
Wait.
Even though it was not on the cell phone.
So how did the knife end up on freaking ground?
They heard witnesses shouting that. And witnesses, and quick summary, have different perspective, varying accounts of what happened. That's not unusual. And in this particular case, and the reason why I described the SUV in this, because many times the witnesses were obstructed by certain portions of this encounter. Some saw what took place in the rear. Some saw what took place on the side. Some saw what took place during the actual discharge of the firearm. Keeping in mind that this was a struggle, and a struggle with police officers. It was a very active, resisting struggle, which creates stress. And when stress occurs, witnesses and police officers will see things in terms of what happens with stress. Things like you get tunnel vision, things like auditory, exclusion, memory distortion. All of those things take place. You focus in on the gun, you may miss other things. That is not uncommon. Besides the officers that were yelling. As you heard in the video, citizens were yelling. Some saw actually saw Officer Shishki make initial contact. They heard what the exchange. Some heard. Some actually saw the tasing and the responsibility. I mean, how that the response of that. So there were a whole host of things that the witnesses saw, and it varied in accounts. And my point here is that when this is public, sometimes we think that there's a conflict, but it depends upon your perspective. It depends upon your location, your distance, your proximity to what's going on. And then there are all those things that happen in terms of tunnel vision, attentional bias. Do you focus in on something? Do you miss other things? Also, the rapidly evolving nature of this. This took the entire incident. By the time they called dispatch, that shots were fired. It was about 1 minute and 5 seconds. Going to officers acted reasonably at the scene. There were 4 key decision points that I looked at, and I want to go through these really quickly, but I do want to hit on them. The initial choice to arrest Blake, they had no choice, and we talked about that. The discretion they did not have any discretion. This was not a lower level warrant. There are times with a lower level warrant you may say, we'll decide to come back or do something like that. But in this particular case, it was a felony warrant. They did not have any choice. Drawing their firearms after the physical measures did not work during the tasers. When they drew their firearms, all of them were able to see that Blake was armed. The choice to re-engage and to grab Mr. Blake before he got into the vehicle. The DA talked about this, what Officer Shishki was thinking. He was thinking, I had a person with a warrant who had actively resisted. There's a child in the vehicle. Will this person leave? Will they flee? Now, from a policing standpoint, someone may ask, well, why didn't they grab him earlier when they're walking around the vehicle? Well, based upon training, you do not grab someone that is armed with a knife. Their procedure is to step back, as I mentioned, and to create distance and to give verbal commands, which they did during this. But if you notice, as soon as Blake got to the vehicle, Mr. Blake got to the vehicle, the officer grabbed him. In the officer's mind, and the way I interpreted the reports, in the officer's mind, you cannot leave. You cannot leave with that child in the vehicle. Now, someone won't say, well, it was his child. Keep in mind the officer didn't know that was his child, but it doesn't matter. Because any officer worth their salt, they're not going to let someone leave under these circumstances. Not leave. You could have a pursuit. This is the stuff that Amber Alerts are made of. You've got the undertones of a domestic. There are reports upon reports and incidents upon incidents where you have a domestic situation where children become victims. In the city where I was a police chief, one of our quadruple homicides.
So he was a police chief. This man is auditioning for a long-term job as a Fox News analyst. You know that, right?
Allow for him to get into the vehicle and leave. That is critically important. And then the last decision point, which is this idea that the police officer is in close proximity.
Nobody's going to ask. Yo, this is the thing that pisses me off. These reporters, right? The media, ask him, why are not these officers trained to shoot? We've seen enough movies. We see how police officers are trained to shoot. You don't train someone to shoot someone in the thigh when he's less than freaking 2 feet away from you? Put your fucking gun to his thigh and shoot him in the thigh. Shoot him in the knee. Shoot him in the calf.
Yes.
Shoot him in the meat of his thigh. He'll live.
There were no less than 2 feet away. So the opportunity was there. And these are the things that officers are trained on.
Listen, this is some putting mad spin on shit.
Opportunity, And then the
You know what I'm
question
saying?
is intent. Intent is one
It's
of the
what
things
Boston promoters do when the artist don't fucking show up. Or he's in town and shows up 5 minutes to 2 to go on stage. While you spent $40.
regard,
Pussy all VOG shit.
thrust the
Right
knife
here.
forward.
You let someone yab, 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 yab on.
To shoot
After a while,
was
you
based
believe him
upon
or you just get tired and give up. And they
So
keep
let me
doing
go
it.
to, again, for sake of time, let me move to the decision to shoot 7 shots. And this is probably the question that I have been asked the most. Why 7 shots? Now, first, officers in the state of Wisconsin are trained to shoot until the threat has stopped.
The fuck?
That forms the basis. So what
Empty
you
your
have
gun.
is a situation where Officer Shishki is standing there, Officer Arenas is standing there, and the Mr. Blake thrusts the knife forward. Officer Shishki decides to shoot, and he's going to shoot till the threat stops. According to Officer Shishki, he did not stop shooting until Blake dropped the knife. Now, that
Thrust the knife
encounter,
forward. He had
because
his
when
back to
shots
the dude.
Started and when the shots ended was roughly between 2.5 and 3 seconds. 2.5 and 3 seconds, which
Yeah.
he got off 7 rounds.
Yeah.
So at one point in time, which is very difficult to determine, at what point in time did Blake drop the knife? Was it at 4 shots? Was it at 3 shots? Was it at 6 shots? Which is really hard to determine. But in 3.5 seconds, it would have had to have, in 2.5 to 3 seconds, it would have had to been within that time frame. So that's how quickly those 7 rounds went off. Adding to the complexity of this is something that is referred to as the perception reaction time cycle. And in short,
Fuck,
what that
yo,
is,
what
is
if shot number 7 was the one that paralyzed him for life? Eh?
you need to stop shooting based upon what you see, feel, and understand in terms of the stimuli that this is no longer a threat. So you have to articulate that or think about that in your mind and then have a physical reaction to stop. The experts in the field say that takes somewhere in the neighborhood, that gap time takes somewhere in the neighborhood about 1.5 seconds. In that time, you can get off another round, and that is the reaction time. Adding to the complexity would be things like officer readiness, meaning training, experience,
Dunce level.
age, all of those things come into play.
Age.
Also, stress, auditory exclusion, time distortion. This is a stressful environment that the officer is operating in. So that is why I concluded that it was in an acceptable range. An acceptable range, a range. So the range works like this. There are those things that are under in terms of use of force, and there's those things that are excessive. The accessible range falls right within that category there. So let me move to the last thing that I would like to comment on in terms of kind of a framework that you use here, is that, as I've mentioned, if I didn't, I'll clarify it, the officers involved in this use every one of the intervention options to try to restrain Blake during this situation. It was everything from presence, dialogue, hand techniques, diffusing techniques, to tasers, to eventually, unfortunately, really unfortunately, was the use of deadly force. And in all of those situations, there's this thing called proportionality. And proportionality works like this. 1, did they use the proper option for that particular situation? Did they use the taser when it was called for? Did they use dialogue when it was called for? Did they use hand techniques? It needs to match this certain set of situations that the officer is involved with. That is proportionality. That you obviously don't use a baton to hit someone when the situation calls for dialogue. That's the type. Then it is the amount. Was the amount proper? And in all those situations that we saw, that the amount was proper. Then the third thing, and that is what America is looking at, and this is why I want to end on that, is that even if the officer does all of those things, there is still something that is called the eye test.
What?
Does the American public see it in that way? And that is always a question that we struggle with in terms of proportionality. It may be legal. It may be within policy. It may be with training. But there is still a question with the public in terms of proportionality. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back over to the DA to see if there are any questions for Q&A.
They don't want to prosecute because
Sure. Go ahead.
they know that the police unions are going to get a top lawyer, and he might, they don't want to even charge them with nothing. Nothing. Not even like whatever degree assault. Everything was justified. Let's see what these reporters are asking now. Pick up everybody on YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah, I'll let Chief Ray back up.
Okay.
This guy going to be on
First,
Fox News
this
for
is
years
involved.
now. Watch.
When I first started in policing, we were trained to shoot two rounds, recover, examine what is going on in your environment, and if the threat is still continuing, then you shoot two more.
Okay.
What has happened, or what had happened over time, is that between the time that the officer would lower to the low ready, the threat at times would still continue, and the officer was in jeopardy, and many times the officer would get hurt or killed. So the training evolved to the point where, right now, is that you shoot until the threat has stopped. Now, many people will think that officers shoot to kill. That is not what they're trained to do. That is not the philosophical underpinnings of what officers are expected to do. An officer is expected, when they're using deadly force, to use deadly force to the point where the threat has stopped. Does that make sense? Or is it?
Makes sense, but why 7 shots? Answer the damn question.
The whole world was looking at this. European public looked at this simply as a matter of extreme excessive force.
Okay.
It would take 7 bullets to stop somebody. It's just not acceptable in many different cultures. Maybe it is acceptable here, but frankly, for a lot of people outside of the United States who are looking at this, it looks like a prime example of the police abuse.
That's a foreign reporter asking too.
Concur with how this came across. I felt that.
Concur. Anybody uses them words there?
But the
Look
flip
out for
side
them
of
blood
that
clot
is that
people,
not-
you see?
It's not necessarily true
concur.
that in a
Once you
use
say
of
I
force
agree,
situation, that it would only take one shot to stop a threat. What you want to do is to stop the threat. That is the intent.
You're
That is the
right
approach
there.
here.
You're next to the dude. You're next to the dude. You can smell his freaking breath. Come on. You tell me you couldn't shoot the dude in his leg?
You said at the beginning of your statement, as a father, it was tough for you to watch. And the district attorney, I would ask you the same question. At the beginning of your presentation, you outlined so clearly you don't know what it's like to walk in the shoes of black and brown people. So let's speak to that, please. Thank you.
And the question is, what is it like? Could you?
The question is, what is your message to members of the black and brown community? They see you there, they saw you as someone working closely with the case, and most likely put their trust in you.
My message is this.
What's your message to the black community?
This was a difficult case. It was a difficult case when I was asked to get involved in this. It was hard for me to get involved in this for a variety of reasons. One, because of my work and my profession. One, because, being born and raised in the state of Wisconsin, living here and dealing with many of the issues that black and brown people deal with, dealing with this on a national level, going into cities like San Francisco, Memphis, when all of these high-profile, Cleveland, when all these high-profile incidents have come up. I would like once to be able to provide some perspective in one of these incidents to say that this works. The criminal justice system works. It works for you. It works for everyone. But our ultimate obligation is truth. My ultimate obligation in looking at this was to look at the facts. and to determine those facts and to share the facts. The reason why I got involved in this is that I wanted to be an outside person that looked at this. And there were decisions that were made by a number of people. We focus on the decisions that were made by the officers, which we should. They are the guardians of democracy. They are the ones there that should take the lead and do the right thing. They're trained. But there are also decisions that are made by people that are involved in this. There are decisions by the person that called. There were decisions by Mr. Blake. And some of these decisions place us in jeopardy. I listened to Mr. Blake during those audio conversations. I felt bad as a father, a man with so much promise, and this happened to him. Seems like a bright man. I looked at the eyes of those eyes of the child that sat in the back seat of that car and wondered how that was going to impact that child and wondered what the future was going to be. The criminal justice system is a difficult system. It is hard. It is harsh. It is difficult. It has the history of racism on top of racism, and we are trying to work through this. But we cannot work through this by just trying to find a decision that is comfortable with people. We've got to find the right decision. It's got to be grounded in truth. It's got to be grounded in facts. That's the obligation that I was given when they told me to look at this. 30 years that I have struggled with this. It has been a stressful endeavor to be involved in policing for 37 years and to be an African American male. And I feel it in the worst way. That's why this is so difficult, but I was not going to step back from it.
What is the employment status of the three officers involved, or all of them still?
Yeah, we don't have neither of us have anything to do with that. So we're not able to help you in any way on that.
Why couldn't the officer, you said that it was impossible for the officers to let Jacob Blake leave. Although all the time we hear that, like in a hit-and-run case or a high-speed chase, it's too dangerous to continue to pursue. Why was that not even an option in this case?
Yeah, go ahead, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, what you want to do in a situation like this is minimize the harm and minimize the risk. So the harm that we had there at that particular time is we had harm and jeopardy to the child that was in the back seat, harm and jeopardy to the officers that were at the scene, and potentially to the people that were there. To have a vehicle that is moving around at a high rate of speed, you have increased the harm to the community. You have also created a situation where we get hundreds of thousands of these a year, potentially, where you have an Amber Alert. You have a child that is abducted. And the connection here is that many of these take place not with strangers, their boyfriends, their relatives, their fathers. The incident that I talked about in Madison when there was a quadruple homicide, that was a father involved in a domestic. Another one was a boyfriend in 2011 where two babies were found in the trunk as a result of a domestic. That's what officers are trying to avoid.
How many children live in Kenosha?
I want to speak to that briefly as well, though. So those of you who are from Kenosha or know Kenosha know that in the 4 months just prior to August 23rd, there were 2 fatal accidents where police chased individuals. So we had 2 fatal accidents resulting in the deaths of the individuals driving those vehicles. LaQuisha Booker has a prior contact in those cases where a vehicle was stolen from her in the context of one of those domestic incidences. Officers got in a high-speed chase with Jacob Blake.
All right, they keep going back to other cases, situations in the past.
This is real. This is something that happened.
They don't want to prosecute people, so that's basically what it comes down to. They don't want to prosecute, all right? So the rest will be on CNN and stuff. That black guy, that ex-police chief, he's going to end up on Fox as an analyst because they love the way he go on today. And my prediction is Attorney Benjamin Crump, who's representing Jacob Blake, will make a settlement in a civil suit with the city, and they'll pay real fast, and this will be pushed under the rug. anybody that Benjamin Crump represents, whether they are alive, he represents them, or that if they passed away, like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, he represents the family. And his system is, I'll get on TV, I'll make a big deal about this, but we'll make a settlement, and you guys can let the cops walk, unless it's blatant, like the guy who killed George Floyd. Rest in peace to them. And Jacob Blake, hopefully he can recover and have a full life. And it's tragedy, but the way they're pushing this under the rug, I don't like it. I don't know about you. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Sorry about the sound not being up in the beginning. It's fixed now, so you can continue watching on your local TV network. All right, be safe. Happy 2021 to you. Wish you all the best. Stay safe. Take care of yourself and your family.